Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see so many friendly faces and so many familiar faces. And this is the second year of this conference, and I'm pleased to be part of it. And thank you for the steering committee to putting together a fantastic program. So this presentation I would set the scene of what's happening now in the healthcare and what will happen in the next 5 years. And then I would invite my esteemed friend and colleague from the industry side who will introduce himself in a moment to give a perspective how that impacts us in the market research. From his vast experience of working at various big pharma and small pharma and mid-sized pharma company to give from his vantage point, what is these changes mean to us. And that's the plan. And I noticed when in the keynote speak on there are some commonality. There is some repetition. So for those of you who come today, there'll be some education. But there are some things which reinforces itself from the talk from Tuesday, from Yarik from AbbVie, and Mark from Teva about some of the things that you will see. It might be repetition, but we will have a different view. So just to introduce myself, so my name is Rafaat Rahmani, and I started the company 11 years ago, and I've been in industry for 24 years. And before coming to pharmaceuticals, I used to work in fast-moving consumer goods companies, in marketing, in McDonald's Corporation, and in Pepsi Cola. And after MBA, I got involved with pharmaceuticals, and I worked for Eli Lilly and Company in marketing, research, in competitive intelligence, in decision support, forecasting, and as well as pricing reimbursement. So that's me, and I'll pass it over to Joe to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Joe Saraiva. I'm working with the marketing intelligence at Astellas Pharma Europe. As market researcher, I'm quite privileged because I only work with pipeline and licensing products, so I don't have the pressure that my colleagues that work with inline brands have. So it's an almost relaxed life. But the case is that we need to operate with very quick turnarounds and under severe pressure and scrutiny from all levels of the company. So that's the trade-off. I started my career pharmaceutical industry side. I was vendor side. I moved back to the industry side. You decide which one is the dark side. For this conference, Rafaat, we were talking about one lunchtime, and Rafaat told me about this presentation, and he asked me if I could provide some keynote at the end of his presentation, how I see from the eyes of the industry all these exciting changes that are occurring in our lives and our companies. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So without further ado, just to give a quick introduction, who is Lifescience Dynamics? So we are a decision support company. We work with a global headquarter organization, and we have 3 practice areas. One is being market research, one is being competitive intelligence, and one being market access. So we have a different view of the market because we also have competitive intelligence and market access within our practice area. So moving quickly to the agenda, we will give you a little bit background of the things that are happening at macro level, at the big picture, and that we can't change anything about. And then what are the things happening already and will happen in the next 5 years in terms of regulatory landscape, in terms of future of healthcare industry. And then finally, we'll come to Joao to talk about what are the implications for all of us and what we need to do to be able to adopt to these new changes. So some of these things that's happening at a big global level, we are in a seismic shift of things, of profound demographic changes that is happening around us that we can't affect. First and foremost is aging population. As we saw from the keynote speak, we are living longer, and that has a huge impact on the healthcare cost. There are less young people, there are less young people to put into the system, insurance or national taxes to help for the older people. And there are data that people in the last 10 years of their life consume almost 80% of the healthcare spend. So as we're getting older, we are using more and more healthcare budget. The other thing with the aging population is chronic illness. So as we get older, some of those chronic illness, CNS, dementia, Alzheimer, Parkinson's, diabetes, all of that compounds the effect of chronic diseases. So if you look at some of this data that I'm sharing here with you, by 2020, over 20 million people would die from cardiovascular diseases. And there is so much, almost 23 million people diagnosed with cancer. I mean, so this is just profound pressure on our healthcare system. And to compound all that, we have low fertility rate, as we heard again. And actually, I saw those two ads that Dr. Yarik was talking on Tuesday, the one from Denmark and the one from Singapore, where they had a Singapore day, where they're saying, we need to have replacement of this population. So those are the things that me and you can't change. And so what we do. At the same time, while this is happening, if you look at this data, so this data is from IMS. So this is BRIC plus Mexico and Turkey. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China, Mexico and Turkey. So the size of the bubbles are the population. So if you look at the populations of India and China, of course, they are huge, over 1 billion people. And if you look at, on one axis, you have the market value in dollar terms. So US reaching almost $1 trillion. I mean, almost 800 for this side, almost $800 million. And what is main thing to note that most of the Western market, you look at US, Japan, France, Italy, Canada, Germany, they're all flat-lined. They are not growing. So over the last few years, they are not growing. What is growing is the emerging markets. So there is a compounding effect. One is, of course, the population size is big, and the growth is big. So if you multiply that, they are having a little bit multiplier effect. And it is, I just came from China 2 weeks ago, and I met a Chinese company, which is 5th largest Chinese company, and they have 10,000 reps, 10,000 reps. And they are calling on the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And they are really very aggressive about trying to catch up with the Western standards of the medication and the per capita spend on at least the rich people. And some of the rich people's per capita income is almost like it's over $50,000 per year. So they have the budgets and powers to do that. They are running very fast to catch up with what we spend per person per capita in these countries. So if you look at Brazil, Russia, India, Mexico, and Turkey, they're all in the growth phase. So what do we do? So this is the main thing. So while that is happening, so big demographic changes are happening around us. And our core markets are flatlining. So what do we do? Well, as a pharma company, actually, we are also getting lots of new legal legislation issues on top of that to complicate our lives. So as some of you saw the presentation this morning from Peter Blythe from EGA, some of the European countries are going to put quotas on biosimilar substitution. And the doctors are getting incentivized for biosimilar substitution. So if you look at 5 years ago, 2009, 2010, 2011, we had a patent cliff of the generics. So big blockbuster drugs like Lipitor went generic, and that had a profound impact at that time. What I'm saying here that now the biosimilars are come, and the first biosimilar is already launched in the US. Even though the uptake of biosimilars are low at the moment, but payers are encouraging and putting systems in place to do more substitution. And there is also move for some regulatory harmonization. So we already see that in Europe we have EMA, which is centralized position approval thing. And plus there is also, among all that, there's also expedited review process in the US and for highly unmet conditions, disease and indication. So these are happening at regulatory level, but also for us in the industry in market research, we have been given a little bit more controls about fair market value of honoraria, how much we could pay the physician for his or her time for participating. And while that's happening, there is also a trend to make the health technology assessment harmonization. So all these things are happening, making our lives as market researchers complicated and difficult, and we have to rise to the challenge. So if you look at the biosimilar substitution, in Europe, we already have 21 drugs, biosimilars already. Recently, the first monoclonal antibody infliximab was launched, Remsima. And in Europe, the hurdle for biosimilar companies are lower than in the US. So if you take example of Humira, which has 3 block area of indication, so dermatology, immunology, and GI. So if a biosimilar company does a trial in one of the indication in dermatology, that data can be extrapolated in immunology, but not in GI. So they don't have to go through the whole trial process, and there is no burden of proof for interchangeability in Europe. Whereas so if you look at this chart, where these are the automatic substitution, so countries like Bulgaria, Cyprus, and Estonia, and Latvia, these kind of countries, they are, I mean, the pharmacist can choose, substitute at the will of his her doing. And these are a group of countries with no specific guidelines. So our hypothesis is, in the future, there will be harmonization also, and almost every country in Europe is going to go for that kind of automatic substitution. Because the issue is affordability. Simply, there is no budget, and pharmaceutics product is one of the target by this health budget and politician to make sure that the patients are getting the cheapest and the best drug. If you look at the same picture in the US, there's only one biosimilar approved, and which was recently because of the guidelines and all that. And there they have to have one more burden to prove, which is the interchangeability. Interchangeability, it means that in the clinical trial, they have to be able to switch from originator to the biosimilar and vice versa. And so there's a little bit more pressure in the US and therefore the clinical trials and all that, this is happening. But if you take example of how aggressive the generics have been in the US, because before the generic comes, the big wholesalers already have the codes in the pharmacies with the generic products. So almost in a 6 month, 8 months, some generic product would be losing 80–90% of their value. We feel that would happen once biosimilars get much more established in the US. So in the US, the substitution is permitted, and the biosimilar entry strongly threatens the originator because of what has happened if you learn from the generics. So the implications for the originator company is there is a huge cannibalization issue there from there. So I'm not going to read through that. But also in US, substitution is dependent on the state by state. So there are states like Colorado, Delaware, where automatic substitution and there's a law is enacted, whereas some states the laws has been passed but not yet enforced, and some places there is a law being debated. So again, there is a trend for harmonization there. Also, there is a lot of data sharing from between EMA and FDA. So they are trying to help to get faster access to medications, to reduce duplications, to help do fewer clinical trials, and sharing of experience and knowledge between the two agencies, the FDA and EMA. And because both of them also don't have unlimited resources, they want to make efficiencies there as well. So that is all going to create. But on the positive note, in FDA, because of the expedited review process and all that, if you look at the chart, the average days for approval is not changed from 304 days to 302 days, but the spread has been, come down. If you look at the average of from 2003 to 2012 to 2011 to 2012, there's more and more drugs. The range, the average stays the same. The minimum approval days pretty much stays the same, but the length, the extended long approval dates are coming down. So that is a positive for us in the industry. But if you look at 2014, what is happening? Those drugs that are getting approved, they are getting approved for very complicated illnesses. And there are more biologics, more orphan drugs. So in 2014, 66% of the drugs were orphan indication, 41% had a fast track, some of the 22% had accelerated processes. So what we need to do in the industry to understand this complexity of new drugs, new indication, multiple indications. This is a survey by a company MedPanel where they spoke to 448 physicians. And they asked them, because of Sunshine Act, do you participate less in market research? And 21% said, yes, I participate less. So not that we only had those kind of problems to deal with, because of the Sunshine Act and the fair market value of the honorea, and because of the reporting burdens on the physician, they are not willing to participate. So respondent universe is shrinking as well. And in Europe, there is also a huge push to unify the health technology assessment, and it's a long way. It's not. I think towards the end we will discuss whether it's going to be feasible, but you know, it is a long way before it comes to reality. But we never said no, never again, because before EMA came for the one central regulatory approval, people were cynical. They thought that will not happen, but that has happened already. So I think the jury is out whether there will be harmonization on the HTA process through the UNETA in Europe. While we are facing that, those challenges, ladies and gentlemen, we are really in the middle of digital revolution. Everything is being digitized. And there's a digitized electronic medical records, there is a diagnostics and sensor, there is a medical health application, there's a genomics, and patients are becoming more and more like consumer. So those healthcare trends impact a variety of stakeholders, patients, payers, medical professionals, all our industry. While that is happening, there is also an era of digitization. Because of digitization is happening, there is on the left-hand side, or your side, okay, it's on the right-hand side or here, there is a patient, doctor-to-patient interaction, so remote consultation, remote monitoring. On the right-hand side is doctor-to-doctor, where things like doctors confer each other, and how this is happening, and and giving through iPod on a hospital run, instead of doctor coming in the morning and saying, hi, hello, how are you feeling? There is a sort of robot with iPad, comes to, it has the navigation, comes to the patient's bedside, says, how are you feeling? And doctors is doing that remotely. All of this is generating a lot of data. While that is happening, the new diagnostic devices are becoming more effective, smaller, cheaper, and lots of smartphones have the add-ons to do the diagnostics. So, so the first diagnostic here is about the smell. The second is about the ear infection. There's also expert system diagnostic to reconfirm. You put in your symptoms, and it will tell you whether you are that symptom, and all of that. And plus, there are companies, many companies who are trying to partner with IBM's Watson. I guess Mark talked about the Teva is partner also with IBM Watson. It will go and keep learning from the mixed diagnosis and to be able to make better diagnosis, predictive diagnosis. While that is happening, if you look at one side, there's a prescription-related devices, should we say, and then on the right side, non-prescription. So the new millennials are very much have this culture of a quantified self. They want to measure everything, so they have the Fitbit, they have the other things to know what they are doing. So that's on that side, so there's a lots of things like happening there. On the left, if you look at the prescription side, so in June, Proteus, with Otsuka, got the first approval of smart pill from FDA. And that pill gonna help increase the compliance of schizophrenia patients. So it's totally biodegradable. So this is all generating data. So there is a rise of big data. And the challenge for us is the issue with privacy, the issue whether that big data gets in the hands of the insurance companies, what will happen and what are the implications. And consumer and provider can integrate this information and make sense out of it. And apart from that, there is hundreds, thousands of mobile applications, all kinds of mobile applications. And many of this mobile health application, has not been developed by healthcare professionals. It's not been clinical trial, but people are using it left, right, and center. And we heard this also on the keynote speak. The cost of personalized medication is becoming much easier. From $10 million cost of genome sequencing is coming to $1,000. And so what will happen if insurance companies will get hold of this kind of data? While that is happening and the patients are taking, because of empowerment, because of the more information, the patients are trying to become much more like equal partners in making the decision with the doctors, co-creating the decision, co-creating the prescription. So there are lots of websites like that where you rate the doctors, you bid for cosmetic surgery, you bid for cosmetic surgery, place a bid for a nose job or whatever. And then on the right-hand side, there are some vocal patients who start a blog. They are not physicians, and many people follow those blogs. And they think, oh, this is truth, this is the reality. So how do you do that? So there's an issue with awareness of campaign and privacy. And coming back to this is the talk that Bharat Tiwari presented 2 talks ago, that going forward, the pharmaceutical company need to, so if you see in this slide, pharma and patients are highlighted in yellow. And if you put in the pharma, and the pharma starts looking from patient's vantage point, the moment you look through the patient's vantage point, then there is a plethora of technology companies that come in and they say, oh, we can do this. So you have from Google's to WebMD to Philips to Alibaba to all kinds of new players are coming. How are we going to partner with them? What they are going to bring to the table? So for example, Vodafone has partnered with GSK in Europe, in Africa, to give information and collect information about vaccination and the reminders and all that. So there are companies who are partnering. So we would not have thought the Vodafone, a telephone provider, a courier, could be partnered with healthcare. While that is happening, and we are saying patient is at center, so the issue is of privacy. So if you look at this privacy data, this is the index of different countries who will be willing to trade off their privacy for some convenience. So maybe some honoria, incentive, whatever. Unfortunately, in my own country, India is the worst. I guess Indians, and then you have Germans who would not trade their personal data for whatever money. And you have that. So there is an issue with the big data. So how will Pharma Market Research Group will rise to this challenge, where we need to do more work with patients, and there's some countries it will be difficult to engage with that. So with that, I pass to Joao to talk from his vantage point from being from industry. Thank you. I'll have to be sitting here.
Thank you very much, Rafaat, and thank you for letting me to provide some footnotes to your talk and to the points that you came up with. Well, first of all, I think that for these 2 days, it's really exciting to see so many professionals, so many colleagues really embracing the change, not being afraid of the change, so knowing that the change is there and is going to change their life, and hopefully we are all working for the better, ours and our patients also. With this, I would say that I'm not going to take advantage of being ahead of our schedule. I have only one slide. So not because I was lazy. This audience doesn't deserve me to be lazy, but probably you know that say that short note that Oscar Wilde once wrote to a friend, which was, "I'm writing you a long letter because I didn't have the time to write a short one." So it's just one slide, but there was quite a lot of talk between us to provide this slide. So the first thing when we are talking about Pharma Market Research Conference here in Antwerp and all the lineup that was prepared, the first thing that came up to my mind is that let's be less selfish and to think that change is not only internal in our companies, it's also external and all the world around us. And being humble, we have to remember that we have different degrees of control, if any, on this change, especially if it is outside our professional environment. One of the first aspects in terms of the change, and it is very common that internal presentations, conference presentations, they start, is that all these demographic changes, all these changes in the frequency of the diseases, the epidemiology driven by aging populations, etc. So as a consequence, we can see today the new drugs coming to the market being very complex from a scientific point of view. I started my professional career when the highlight of the science of the complexity was the prostaglandin cascade, so which today looks like probably the first day of a biology class. So that's a big difference, and this means that in the pharmaceutical companies and when partnering with the business colleagues from agencies, we require not only the business acumen, that knowledge of how the market is formed and operates, but also a good understanding of the underlying science of our assets. It is quite refreshing to see, I would say, that quite refreshing to see that many agencies really saw this aspect very soon, and having their teams, colleagues and professionals with this life science background. I have to confess, I don't have a life science background. I was lucky enough to work for a company that provided that almost like a undergraduate course to the staff working for the company. But today it is really complex, the products that we sell and that we have in our pipeline. So as a researcher and being very much into the business side, I would say that the science is right now has a big weight in terms of our activity and understanding of the underlying science. Other aspect that was also in the presentation, and it was also mentioned across different sessions, was the new geographies that become our current business. And when working with in global projects, as many of us work, we have to understand that the vendors they need to provide us multicultural teams, able to understand the world from a point of view that is not London-centric or Paris-centric or Frankfurt-centric, so even outside of Europe. So that is a quite important aspect, because these different cultures, different healthcare systems drive, probably from the same questionnaire, drive completely different insights. And that is important to recognize when we repackage everything and put that in a global presentation, that we are trying to mix many things that are not that mixable. So the multicultural environment that agencies today foster, it is very welcome, especially when we look into that from the pharma company side, where I work in a team where between us we speak 7 languages. So it's quite refreshing. Talking about pressures, the pressure from bringing the products from the lab or from the research department to market, all of us know about that, and it's of course there are many reasons why this happen. Of course, one of them, and we should be very clear about it and not be ashamed of it, we run a business. And a business is advances and gets better with new products, new services that will improve versus what is current in the market. So, of course, there's a pressure to bring these products to market. The pressures also occur because today the clinical development process, to some extent, because of all the careful and all the teachings that we had in the past, lead us to be more careful today, and with the speed that we bring the products to market. But there is one thing that is called LOE, and we have a certain number of years where we can really have the commercial benefit of that drug. So when all these compounds, and when this brings to for instance, the department where I work with, and colleagues that have similar functions, they tell us that market research, you forget about having 6 months for anything. For 6 months, you'll be fired first, so if you come up with that timeline. Reason is that although we have a long development process, everybody's trying to compress the process, and what is happening is that the time for market research, in a bit of a strange way, looks to be shortened all the time. And this is the reason why, when working with the market research industry, and sometimes I perfectly accept, I'm the first one to, and some of you in the audience know that, I send an RFP, and I, either over the phone or personally, I apologize for the completely delusional timelines. But that's how we operate. We have those timelines because we don't have others. It's not a question of choice, if I can say it like that. So market research pressure is also in this side, and is also time. And this pressure, especially for me, is touching me quite a lot, because I always think that if we had just one more week, should have done something different, should we have come up with a slightly different and more sharp commercial assessment, or just because we were so pressed with time, we stayed with a very vague data analysis and situation analysis, and were not as sharp as desired. That sometimes this is a question that nobody can answer. We never had that extra week. Another aspect that it was mentioned across this conference, and in your talk, Rafaat, was compliance. I remember when I first showed this slide to other colleagues, and someone made a comment, Joe, they are trying to wind you up. The compliance, I take compliance in a very pragmatic way, and what implies in our life as researcher, the timelines, the additional emails, threads, etc. Compliance is there and is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. If we want to work in the pharmaceutical industry this side of this decade and future decades, we are going to have to live with it. So take it cool. That's a way of life, not a way of death. So that's, with all that, we know that as when we mention pressures of timelines and compliance in the same sentence, that's a difficult combination. But anyway, when we discuss the compliance, we have to think in the greater good, which is compliance is there for a reason. Is there in order to provide a safer environment for the users of the drugs that we produce, for the patients who take those drugs, for the shareholders and the management and the staff of the company where we work with. So that's the combination and the trade-off that we have, and that although knowing and that we put, especially in the market research business partners, put some extraordinary pressure, sometimes not even very fair pressure. That's the reason why it is there. And another aspect, and it was just the presentation before was mentioned patients. If we do some quick content analysis of the websites of the top pharma companies, you'll find that the pharma industry is becoming very patient-centric. That's a fact, not even an opinion. It's just going through the top 20 companies, go to their websites, and see that when the companies talk about what is our business, what are our objectives, what are we doing, we put the patient at the center of our activities, and it is rightly so, because if we have looking into our business model, it is very easy to see that if we really take care of our patients, our customers, in the end, being through a physician, not through a physician, through a pharmacist, that will end up benefiting, of course, the shareholders of the company and the staff that works in the company. I'm not being just angelical and to say that we do this because we are just whiter than white. This is a business model. We can only survive in the next years to come if we come completely on the side of the patient and understanding when, and even defending, if you or protecting the patient, if you want, against the inroads of those cost savings that go across the healthcare systems. It has been the activity or the lobbying or the pressure, if you want, of the industry that in many markets created the situation that patients continue to benefit of a certain drugs that otherwise would have been delisted, or the healthcare systems would never paid for them. So it is normal that having the patients at the heart and thinking that they are centric for our activity, in market research, I remember that one colleague, I believe that from UCB, mentioned a very high volume of patient research done by her company. But in general, we do the patient research from a point of view of understanding the patient journey and how, through this understanding, how can we be be better in communicating with those who have a prescribing decision, obviously. It is a give and take in terms of what we want from our patients. Of course, the research with patients, I have to confess to all these market research professionals and colleagues that it is, for me, probably the most stressing piece of work that I do, in the sense that I know much less about patients than I know about physicians. That's a confession that I have no problems to make. But also knowing that we have to be very careful about the research that we do with the patients, because we are interfacing with people that is in a difficult phase of their lives. Usually no one does just research about headaches, but so you have research about very serious conditions, and we have to discuss those serious conditions with the patients, preferably, or caregivers. So this market research is, I wouldn't say that is replacing, but is giving much more, probably much more to do than that very easy KOL research, because KOLs, good KOLs, are wonderful to interview and to do research. I find almost very therapeutic to have KOL research, because they are so knowledgeable. The good ones are so enthusiastic about giving you information about modes of actions and competitors, etc. They said, oh, well, when you present them a TPP, they are all very often so enthusiastic, in such enthusiasm around those, that it's a completely different situation. But that's the balance that we do. The reason of this patient research is to understand really how better communicate to the treaters, what is the real patient journey. And it is amazing, just as a footnote to my footnote, it is almost interesting to see how little some physicians, I don't want to generalize, because generalizations are usually bad or not very precise, but how little some physicians know about their patients. And when we have almost the other side of the mirror, and we had that in a couple of projects, going back to the physician, telling them, well, these were our findings with the patients. We had physicians really surprised with a few things that we showed to them. But going back to the footnote, market research, analytics, data analytics, yes, patients, and there is more and more data available these days, and the healthcare systems, of course, it will take time until Europe will catch up with US in terms of patient data. It's not only a question of privacy, it's also the simple aspect that in the US there is a motivation to collect the patient data because there's an invoice to send to someone. Finally, the last point is about all these wonderful things that we can see, the apps and the electronics, etc. I have to tell you, Rafaat, that you stole my note about the Abilify, the new drug from Otsuka that has incorporated the chip that controls the compliance. So this was interesting. I've been following this digital revolution, well, since digital started. As a matter of fact, my first training was in electronics. And those who know me, though, know that I'm a gadget freak. So having a gadget, the reason to have a gadget is the existence of the gadget. So, but when we look into everything that is around, and there's market researchers, I feel really that it is the real pharma 2.0. This is the big bang in pharma. And as a researcher, either we understand and go on board, or the train already left the station. And we have to be part of it. I would say that the big data that was very much consumer-driven started now being used in pharma. I believe that in the top 20 pharma, all of them, top 20, top 30, doesn't matter, all of them have or it's work in progress, work around big data and work about these analysis of completely different data sets in terms of being able of putting together information from a variety of sources that seem not to be linked and that in the past we didn't manage to uncover any insight from them. And that's the exciting thing for us as market researchers, is that we have usually, using the appropriate tools around big data, you have an enormous amount of information that exists already in the companies and that we can try to uncover for our marketing colleagues. I know that different projects had different outcomes, different rates of success or failure, but this is like anything that it is new and it is uncharted territories. So there will be failures, definitely. Sometimes everybody knows that a failure is more painful than a win. But that's where we are going in terms of our digital future. So with these 6 points as a footnote of this presentation, so I finish and I invite you questions, of course to Rafaat's presentation also, challenges, disagreements. I'm really happy that even the disagreement challenges occur, or if you agree, of course, I'll be more than pleased.
Thank you, yes. So we will take your questions.
Thank you.
Piece of commentary for everybody to think about. So your premise is that biosimilar substitution is bad for the industry. That's what you said. It's got a purpose, and policy makers put that in place to have a purpose, just like with generics, right? Would a CEO of a company that's the company that originated the molecule be perceived as a trustworthy CEO and a patient-centric CEO if he stood up and publicly said, I want to block that?
He will, of course not. Of course he will be perceived as not doing good for the patients. So, but I was drawing the parallel from the patent cliffs and generics, how that hurt the sales and the big pharma. There was a lot of changes in the last 5 years. And if that happens, so there will be another fracture, should we say, in the revenues. But obviously, some of the innovative companies would come up with different models to monetize and make an opportunity out of it. But in a first instant, if that happened, that a big 20, 30, 40% of the sales goes down, then all of a sudden there will be some reckoning to be done.
Yeah, you have to know it's coming in your planning.
Yeah.
But where it gets a little gray is how much you really try to do about it. Okay, that's an ethical question, I think, which is hard. We all face it. It's hard. Something for us to think about.
Can I just add one thing? And I think that your question is very interesting, and I don't think that there's a yes, no, there's not a black and white answer to that question. We know companies, and one company, I don't know if there's anyone in the room working for that company, is Amgen. Amgen is simultaneously developing biosimilars in partnership, and at the same time is suing biosimilar companies because of their patents in the US. So they are both sides of the barricade, if you want. So that's why probably there's not a, it's a business model, I guess.